September 1920. It's good to meet you. Mrs. May Rutherford opened the door to the sitting room, as her husband made to call for tea to be brought. I am delighted that Miss Lucina will stay with us while she is working at the university. May Rutherford was a petite woman, but her vivacity and liveliness more than made up for that. Do you play, Mr. Barrow? She asked, gesturing towards the piano. No, Mrs. Rutherford, Thomas replied, putting out his left hand, still gloved. Even if I could, my blighty put pay to that. The woman nodded, graciously, then looked to the door. Maud, would you show me Lucina up to her room? The maid at the door nodded, and picked up Milo's case. The look on her face a few seconds later told that she wished she hadn't. I can do it, Mrs. Rutherford. Milo has brought a lot with her. He smiled down to Milo, who smiled back. It was true, and Thomas had advised her from packing too heavily. But, who know what she needed? Milo, May Rutherford mused, and looked to Milo. May I call you Milo? Of course, Mrs. Rutherford, Milo told her. And you must call me May, she told her, gesturing to the door. The room is just up the stairs and to the right. Maud will show you. A good-sized room, with everything Milo would need. The university was a mere 5 minutes' walk away, though she may not be at the Cavendish building at the same time as the professor. I have everything, Milo insisted, when the maid had closed the door, heading off Thomas's recurrent question from the minute he had collected her from her home and watched her hand over a key to her home and the shop to Mr. Hepworth, on the train and the short walk from the station. And if I haven't, I have money, she assured him. Yes, yes, Thomas mused, nodding, then slipped his hand into his pocket. Here, he said, and brought out a guinea piece. Milo looked from his hand to his face. You can't give me this, she protested. Anyway, I have money, I can get money. But Thomas pressed it into her hand. I would be happier if you would take it, he told her. Even if you do not use it, keep it for emergencies. Milo nodded, trying to force her mind to think as he might. It was no good. There was no logical reason for Thomas to give her money when she had some and could get more if she were to go to town, to the bank. Do you need to go right away? Milo asked, as she closed the door behind her. Maud, who was waiting patiently outside, showed them down. I have already put 3 weeks' half-days together to come with you, Thomas told her. So if I am to call in on Hepworth this evening, I must get the 1 o'clock train. He reached for her hands, sensing Milo was feeling as he was feeling, a sense of impending loss, and he realized then how much they relied on one another, for companionship. Milo, with no capacity to ever judge him for anything, and he for someone to listen to her even with her seemingly disconnected thoughts that she would run by him at any given moment. I have time to walk you to the Cavendish, he told her, on the threshold of the sitting-room door. There is no need, I can assure you, boomed the friendly voice of Ernest Rutherford. I hope you are assured, Mr. Barrow, that your wife is in safe hands. Thomas turned and nodded, a genuine response to his generous offer of Milo staying with them. And you will stay for tea? And after that, Thomas walked the short distance down the short lane on which the Rutherford house stood with the professor and Milo. The university gate was across the road, and all Thomas needed to do was continue to walk along it to get to Piccadilly station. Yet, for all that, he found his feet reluctant to move on. I will be home before you know it, Milo told him, in an uncharacteristically insightful way. Rutherford will close at Christmas, and besides, I will want to see how Hepworth is getting on. So Thomas kissed his wife on the top of her head, and stood silently as she crossed next to Ernest Rutherford and crossed into her new life. He was about to walk quickly away and set his mind to the rest of the day when he noticed people approaching them. He stopped, and looked. They were approaching Milo and Rutherford, greeting them, greeting her as he watched. Thomas realized he knew some of them. Chadwick, of course, and beside him, John Cockcroft. Patrick Blackett caught his eye, of course, and beside Cockcroft, clapping Milo on the back, was Sinton Walton, who had arrived at Downton to hear Milo's presentation and had been stuck in conversation with Mr. Melsley. Greetings of Ashby. And well, Ashby, looks as if you have arrived. permeated the air, and this somehow took the bitterness off their parting. She was being treated as one of them, something which Thomas, deep down, knew would be. But it was heartening to see. As Mrs. Hughes had advised him the day before, when Thomas had given in and gone to see her, admitting his feelings, he would keep busy, look after his wife's interests at her shop and at the Hall with her experiments, and with her family, the Jamesons, for they were his interests now, too. December 1920. And while it seemed at first that he would never stop feeling sadness for Milo's absence, the weeks and months passed swiftly, and now it was that she had written that she was coming back, and Thomas was cursing himself that he had not overseen her electrical business well enough. It had begun with William Hepworth bringing up the new electrical food blender that Mrs. Batemore had both ordered and was terrified of. A tall, thin man, Hepworth demonstrated how it worked, and then showed Daisy, who was thrilled, and then Mrs. Batemore, who was not. But it soon failed, and it was that failure, and the failure of other electrical devices that Hepworth had supplied, which had made Thomas suspicious. It wouldn't have been Milo, for everything she made she checked before allowing a customer to have it. This man was up to no good somehow, and Thomas meant to find out what was going on. A crisp frost had made the air cold that morning, and as he passed it, Thomas stared to post his letter to the Jameson family into the hall box, to be collected by the post boy in that morning. Their butler, a man named Jack Prue, always sent a reply along with Mrs. Jameson's, and these letters from Prue were beginning to become something to look forward to, witty and amusing as they were. He had known Milo when she had lived with the Jamesons, at the start of the war, something which had surprised Thomas when the man had written to tell him, and then had become a source of good humor between them. "I reckon she will be doing well in Manchester, as long as she remembers which shoe go on which foot," was a typical Priism, or, "She climbed to the top of the tower at Downton Abbey." "Quick, alert the pigeons." "Would you come with me, Mr. Bates?" Thomas had asked him, the night before. "I know we haven't always got on, and you don't like Milo." Bates had held his gaze. "I never said I don't like her. I think he's cheating her," Thomas told him. It was the push Bates needed. Injustice lit a fire in him, and he could not resist putting it right. This had better not be a wild goose chase, he warned Thomas, as the two men tramped the fields, the quickest way to Downton village. It was under the guise of checking with the grocer that all the food needed for Christmas Eve would be ready, a flimsy excuse. But Carson, for once, could sense Thomas's agitation, for they knew that Milo was to be returning. "And where is she going to be sleeping?" Carson had asked Thomas, fretting. "She can't very well stay at her home, alone, with that man Hepworth. She can't stay here." Carson had looked to Thomas, waiting for him to supply an answer. "The generator room is warm, and dry and has a lock," Thomas told him. "Milo has told me she is happy to stay there." When Mrs. Hughes heard that, she told him for shame, that Milo would not be staying at Christmas in an outbuilding, and had arranged for the room beside her own to be prepared, a gesture Thomas had thanked her for. It was originally for the under-housekeeper, but since Downton did not have one anymore, it had been used for storage. It would suit her, it was quiet, and out of the way, and Thomas was grateful she had not insisted on the female servants' rooms, with the girls' silly squawkishness at all hours, despite the rules. "I also have this feeling," Thomas told Bates, "that with the things Hepworth has been supplying to Downton, and an accident will happen one day, it will be bad enough if one of the staff get injured, but one of the family?" He shook his head. "And who would get the blame?" It was a rhetorical question, but still Bates faltered in his reply, and in the end said nothing. That he was going with Thomas to Milo's home and shop in the first place told him enough. It was chillier down the hill as they walked towards the village. No fire was in the chimney of Milo's house. Mrs. Doyle had not yet arrived. At the back door, Thomas pushed at the latch, and to his annoyance it swung open. Anyone could just walk in, anyone could steal from the house, the shop. They waited for Mr. Hepworth to come down the stairs. The rake-thin man was ruffling his hair as he descended, stopping halfway up when he saw Thomas and Bates. "Anyone could have walked in here," Thomas told him, when the man began to make excuses. "This Milo's home, and you are risking her possessions, the shop goods, by not locking up. The man looked between Thomas and Bates, and Thomas fixed him with a stare. We came about the electrical appliances you sold to Downton. Shoddy, miswired accidents waiting to happen. Now look here. Hepworth's voice became hard. What business is it of yours what I do? I deal with Miss Ashby, and seeing as she is away, I will wait for her to be the judge of my... But the man did not get a chance to finish, because Bates had him up against the wall. Miss Ashby, the 16-year-old daughter of your deceased friend, is still away, and you thought to take advantage of her kindness and her absence. Thomas growled at him. Mr. Ashby, your friend? The man had the wherewithal to look ashamed. She will be back in a matter of days, Thomas continued, and she will be the judge of your handiwork, and of the state of the accounts. The man sagged, and Bates released his grip. Of this place cleaned up before she comes, Hepworth agreed. And the shop, and all. He glanced towards the back door of the shop. See that you do. May I also remind you that you take a cut of the profits of Milo's business, so it is in your interests to make sure any work you do goes to your customers in perfect order, or they will think again when buying from Ashby's. The man nodded, and Thomas nodded back. You can't trust a thief, Bates added, glaring at Hepworth. But, young Melusina said, he began to protest. Mrs. Barrow, Thomas corrected, glaring at the man too, to try to intimidate him, and also to ensure he did not turn to look at Bates's face, for he could imagine the look of disbelief on his features. You entered into an agreement with her for half of the profits. Yes. Thomas crossed to the back door of the shop, pushing it open. The place looked as if it hadn't been opened for a while. Dust flew past him, and the electrical appliances looked as if they hadn't been moved for weeks. Under the counter was where Milo kept the books, and Thomas drew them out and turned, taking them with him. In the thin, morning sunlight, he flicked open a few pages at random, and felt rage build in him. William Hepworth had not entered anything into them since the middle of October. I'll be keeping these, Thomas told him. I'll wait for Milo to get back and see what she has to say. If it were up to me, you'd be out on your ear. He turned, and began to walk back down the passage to the back door. Oh, Thomas said, turning back. I shall know if you have done a moonlight flit. I will also know if you have stolen any of the goods. And you ask what my interest is? The man managed to nod his head, mouth half open. I am her husband, so any business you do with me, Lucina, you do with me. Good day to you, Mr. Hepworth. The men stepped out into the winter sun. Thomas tucked the accounts books under his arm and began to stride away. It was only when he had got to the garden gate when he realized Bates was not with him. He turned, and looked at Lord Grantham's valet. Mrs. Barrow? Bates almost spluttered the words. Husband? Thomas gave a polite smile and nodded his head. Bates crossed to him and both men began to walk down the lane to the bridge. Nothing like good Christian values, Mr. Bates, Thomas replied. Milo needed protection, I gave it. I needed financial security, I now have it. Oh. My, Bates said, shaking his head. And she is thriving at the university? No doubt. Thomas held the latch gate open at the bottom of the church grounds and they began to cross them, taking a well-trodden shortcut to the main lane. She would be back here running her business if she wasn't. You saw her at that presentation, like her brother reborn, Bates said. Oh, I am sorry, Barrow, he added, and Thomas considered that John Bates looked indeed sorry. What for? My friend has gone like so many before him. Dulcet decorum eat, as they say. I did what I could for little Milo. Not so little anymore, Bates said. But as honest and open and as free of guile as ever, Thomas told him as they began the gentle climb that would take them to Downton Abbey. I would ask you to keep our nuptials a secret, Mr. Bates, for that is the agreement we have with Lord Grantham. Anyone at the house who knows is to act as if they don't. And you are carrying on as you ever were? Bates asked. No, Thomas replied. She is at university and I get the peace of mind knowing I have someone else in this world to look out for. It may temper my urges. They walked in silence for a time, until the Abbey came into view. Thomas paused, looking up to the main tower, and looking at the pole on which was fastened Milo's wave receiver. just like the one at the church. She was here, even if she was in Manchester. Not even Anna, Thomas told him, if you would be so good. Bates smiled. Little me Lucina, he mused. You have to admit, she is different. We are all different, Mr. Bates, Thomas told him, as they got to the yard. Ivy pushed the door open with her hip and stepped outside with clean, damp rags and began to hang them on the washing line. Some of us are better at hiding it than others. He lowered his voice for a moment. I am sorry to hear of your son, he added. That's quite all right, Bates confided. It was so very long ago. Nearly 20 years. He glanced to Thomas. It's still in my heart, though the pain has been replaced by memory. Well, I thank you for your support today, Thomas said, and clapped Bates on the upper arm, before crossing past him and making his way back into the house. 88,888,888 Milo, where are you? Thomas's smile came through with his shout as he got to the threshold of Mrs. Hughes's sitting room. How do you know she's here? Asked Mrs. Hughes. Thomas smiled. Because, for one thing, there her suitcase is in the room next door, he told her. And because you have had 3 things in need of electrical repair in your table for over 5 months and they are no longer the but on the shelf with the other appliances. And from behind the door Thomas's wife stepped. Look, could you not write next time? He asked, not seeing her immediately as he gave her the gentlest of rebukes. I am sorry, Milo said. I did not know I would be coming back. So when I come back you wish me to write? Then Thomas did see her, tall now, hair pulled back into a tie with a fringe cut in, figure outlined by clothes at least 10 years out of fashion, blouse to her neck, long sleeves, full skirt, and boots. Figure, he noticed, because she was no longer in a suit. Mrs. Rutherford had old clothes which she gave to me, Milo told him, when Mrs. Hughes had left them alone. They are ideal for the laboratory if I spill anything not ruin. Thomas looked at her again, and then down at her open suitcase. Very sensible, he approved. Give anything you have to Mrs. Hughes for one of the maids to clean, but, no, Thomas insisted. I know Mrs. Rutherford is her own maid who does your clothes, so you must give them to Mrs. Hughes, he told her. Milo nodded, then saw him pull out a letter from his waistcoat pocket. Thomas watched as she opened and read it. It's from my grandmother, Milo said. Well, I took the liberty to write to her, to introduce myself, Thomas told her. And she wrote back to me. She says, Milo told him. She tells me that he hopes I am well and that I am remembering everything she taught me. And old Prue sends me his greetings. Prue, Thomas thought, a man who he enjoyed writing to. A servant, and still called butler. But there was only him and a cook to do everything. It was no wonder he had developed a cuttingly dry sense of humor. Then he showed Milo her business accounting books. Yes, these are short, I will have to go and see him, Milo told Thomas. Then, I will come too, Thomas said, not telling her the circumstances under which he had come by the books in the first place. He was less likely to lie to Milo if he was there as well. The electrical work is bad, Milo admitted. If he did this. She looked away. He was my father's friend. If he is not up to it, you need to consider whether he should remain as tenant, Thomas said, sitting down next to her. You could open it up to interview. I can oversee that person. But he had been her father's friend. You don't have to decide immediately, Thomas told her, sensing Milo's hesitation. But if he is not doing the work, if he is cheating you, he is not your friend. And Milo did not argue. Instead, Thomas excused himself as Milo made to unpack and hang her clothes in the small wooden wardrobe. If it was your intention was to make her happy, then you have done it, Mrs. Hughes told him, when dinner was over. Well, good, Thomas replied, inhaling on his cigarette, and putting down his newspaper. And what about yourself? Thomas looked at Downton's housekeeper, and got to his feet. He strode out of the servants' hall and along the corridor, following her. Mrs. Hughes held open the door, then closed it behind him when Thomas stepped in. I am happier than I was. However, his voice trailed off and he looked first at the door and then at the floor. Come now, Mrs. Hughes told Thomas Barrow. You can tell me. Just trying to get over someone, Thomas asked, wretchedly. Why does it have to be this hard? Mrs. Hughes looked at him for several minutes, then smiled. Do you mean Jimmy? I mean Jimmy, Thomas repeated, almost spitting the words. Sometimes, he shook his head, my mind drifts, and he's there, walking around in it. Mrs. Hughes shook her head. These things are meant to try us, she consoled, reaching out a hand and patting him on the arm. Just because on the face of it you are following convention, does not mean to say you can change your heart. To love unselfishly is a gift from God. But Thomas yanked his arm away, and folded both of them, half turning to the housekeeper. But I don't love unselfishly, Mrs. Hughes, Thomas admitted. I selfishly want ... him. My word, Mrs. Hughes told him, after a time. I was referring to your brotherly love for Milo. Thomas said nothing, but stared at the flagstone floor as if it had offended him. Thank you for telling me, Thomas, Mrs. Hughes said, as he suddenly made a jerk towards the door. He stopped, and looked pitifully at her. And, she continued, as I said, if your intention was to make her happy, to give her choices, give her a life, then you have done it. Thomas nodded, but said no more, before opening the door of Mrs. Hughes's sitting room and striding through it. Milo, meanwhile, had not come out of her room, not even for supper. Instead, she was reading the work she had brought with her. A swift knock, and a more composed Thomas stepped in. It's late, you should not be up, he told her, and when he realized she had eaten nothing, brought her a plate of bread and cheese. Good night, he told her, before making his way up the back stairs to his own room. But, he did not stay there for very long. His admission to Mrs. Hughes that evening had unsettled his mind. Thomas got back up and made his way down the stairs and into the hall, and froze. Above him, a figure was following him. Milo. Thomas hissed in astonishment as she came closer towards him. Where have you been? To get the transmitter, Milo told him. Lord Grantham wanted it to be taken down. She held out the mast with the electrical device attached to it. I couldn't get the pole, it was too dark to see. He didn't necessarily mean now, Milo, Thomas gently chided. It could have waited till the morning, but he broke off when he realized that there was a figure in the hall. And Thomas realized why his attention was being called in that direction. The conversation, which was not in English. Not being in English was not a problem, for Thomas could discern the tone of the conversation. For Mr. Branson was being neither calm nor measured with his words. They waited until the end of the telephone call, which was, in fact, when Branson slammed down the receiver. The man paused, put a hand to his jaw, as if thinking, before stalking away. I wonder what that was about, Thomas asked, when they quickly and silently got back to Milo's room. Milo sat on her bed and looked thoughtful. Only hearing his part, it's difficult to say, wholly. Thomas looked at his wife. Of course, she understood it. Someone should not go somewhere now, the plan has changed. Yes, Thomas prompted. Then he said, to hell with all that, brother, I have a daughter now, and then, I am no traitor. Then, she turned to look at Barrow in the lamplight, severely, then a word which was not polite, tell them to wait and they will have what they want. She looked keenly at him and Thomas placed a reassuring on her shoulder. Tell me again, he asked, and Milo did so. Go back to bed. I am going back to bed, Thomas told her, getting up. And sleep well. You too, Thomas, she said, and he bent and kissed her forehead, waiting at the door to watch as Milo slid between the covers before he closed her door. He had thwarted Branson with his guardianship plans, and whether the man knew that or not, Thomas did not care, for it could not be undone. Denying the man his money, assets, the business by marrying Milo, Rat was payback for the white feather he had given to Ernest. Now, Thomas Barrow had a new interest, and that interest which would not rest until he had uncovered it all.